For the longest time, I secretly wanted more. I often found myself shrinking to fit in, settling for what was comfortable, and even selling myself short. Once I finally accepted that we deserve success and we are blessed with the power to achieve it, I stopped playing small. I'm serious about building a life I love, and you should be too. I'm Denise Taylor of DeniseTaylor.live, and welcome to Life, Love, in the Pursuit of Happiness. I help women prioritize themselves, their success, and their happiness. Let's meet this week's achiever whose story will inspire you to push past your fears and soar. Well, hello, it's Denise Taylor. You know I'm always excited to have you join me every week here at Life, Love, in the Pursuit of Happiness. I welcome you to the Tips from the Top series. Now, the reason why I decided to do Tips from the Top is because many times we feel like those people with big titles are untouchable. And God has blessed me with an incredible professional network. And I thought that I could bring to the table some people who have achieved some really great accomplishments and allow us to have a conversation about their experience. You see, the Tips from the Top series is about tapping into the wisdom of leaders. And I believe wisdom is the principal thing because it helps us to understand what was the motivating factor, what was the differentiator that helped them to accomplish and achieve. Now, we all have personal goals, professional goals, entrepreneurial goals, and I think when we hear from people who are doing it, it helps us to know how we can sharpen our skills, how we can sharpen our perspectives, and how we can then show up differently and become more accomplished as well. So the Tips from the Top series that we're going to be taking under in the month of October, I am excited about. This series is going to bring to the table some people that I think are going to enlighten us all on what it takes to really reach a pinnacle of success professionally. My first guest is Dr. Patrick Graham. Dr. Patrick Graham is an incredible trailblazer in the communities that he serves and in the communities that he has lived in. I think you're going to find he is one that has navigated and really cares about the heart of people and the service of people. Dr. Patrick Graham is the CEO of the Concord Family Enrichment Association. You know, Dr. Graham is about justice. He is about movements and he is about legislative change. And in talking with him, we get to understand the passion that drives him around equality. Now, the Concord Family Enrichment Association does a lot of work around housing and around equality, but that just scratches the surface of what he brings to the table. You see, at a young age, Dr. Graham was the executive director for the Dr. Martin Luther King Center. He has also gone on to be the CEO and president of the Urban League affiliate of the Carolinas. And over the years, he has led movements and organizations that have assisted over 500,000 people in education, workforce development, housing, and entrepreneurship. He has his hand to the plow in making a difference in community. And when I thought of Tips from the Top, I knew that he had the credibility to help us sharpen our skills. Now, I think you're going to find in each and every one of the guests that come to the Tips from the Top series, including Dr. Graham, they embraced in some way, shape, or form the success superpowers that I talk about all the time. They saw themselves successful. They were able to shake off fear. They did the work. They took care of themselves in the process to carry the mantle of the weight of what it was they were to accomplish, and they held fast to their faith in some way, shape, or form to get to where they have excelled. Now, in this conversation, I want you to take a note or two. I want you to grasp a couple of nuggets that you can walk away from and apply to your life. You see, the impact of this platform is not about entertainment. It's not even about revelations. It's about transformation. And so I want you to really listen closely and figure out how you can apply what you're hearing to your own life. I'll see you on the other side. Well, I am excited to welcome Dr. Patrick Graham to Life, Love, and the Pursuit of Happiness. He is a respected and sought after leader and collaborator, often championing affordable housing and policy agendas. He serves as CEO, such an impressive title, I might add. But in our segment today, we'll get a chance to meet and discover more about the man behind the vision for change. During this Tips from the Top series, we are embracing wisdom from senior leaders who have agreed to share their professional and life experiences with us. And now I can't wait to unpack more with Dr. Graham. So thank you for being here with me. Thank you for being a guest on Life, Love, and the Pursuit of Happiness. It's my pleasure to welcome you. And if you don't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself and briefly walk us through your professional career.
Well, first of all, just thank you for having me. I appreciate that. So if you were to think about my career, I liken myself to be a Jedi practitioner, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion practitioner, before it was fashionable.
Mm-hmm.
My career actually has two trajectories, one professionally in the public and social sector, the other in education as a professor.
Mm-hmm.
On the public and social sector side, I started my career as a young executive director. I think I was 26 years old of the Martin Luther King Center in New York, out in Long Island, focused in youth services and disconnected youth advancement. And then found myself actually here in Charlotte in 2001. I became director of emergency financial assistance and self-sufficiency for crisis assistance ministry and the county's eviction prevention program. And so it's my first time really getting involved in housing. Became also the president of the Urban League, where I really focused a lot more on workforce development, created a bank that ended up lending about $6.7 million to small Black businesses. Workforce board, became president there for a couple of years. And then most recently, senior policy advisor for the city of Richmond, and focused a lot there in wealth development. So what were ways to sort of alleviate poverty, but also create wealth in communities that were untapped. And so now here I am as the CEO of the Concord Family Enrichment Association. And my focus is really on building brick and mortar, actual affordable housing, not just an advocate, but actually building it, but also connecting people to other resources. So the city of Concord, as well as some of the community, decided they wanted to use my workforce and economic development background with this housing initiative to really make some cross-sector collaboration between them. So that's where I am today.
That's awesome. That's very, very impressive. The way that you serve so publicly just lets me know you have a heart for people. You have a heart for change. You've devoted so much of your career to being a service to community, and that is definitely powerful, impactful. That's the stuff legacies are built on. So tell me this, from your perspective, how do you define success?
I define success as actually having impact on issues, people, or even policies that you will not always see come to fruition as you begin to work on them. And this is, a lot of people don't necessarily agree with that because they want quick return. I think that I've always thought about the long game. The long game is important because at the end of the day, we're talking about creating systems impact. You want to transform things, not just sort of live in them, but live outside of them. And so I've seen that come to fruition in some cases, but it takes a while. And I think that's what we need from leaders now, much more of an investment of their time and energy to create a longer term vision while still accomplishing some goals in between.
That's awesome. That's a great definition, because you're right. Sometimes we do get stuck on those immediate results, those immediate returns. It likens me to be able to say you're a sower of seeds, right? And you are not impatient in the sense that you can't rush the harvest. You want the harvest to mature in its own time. And that may mean it matures outside of the realm of you being there. And you indicated that you are okay with that, which is a very powerful statement. So when you think about the seat that you're sitting in, tell me about the hardest thing you had to overcome to sit in that seat.
Well, I think the hardest thing that you have to overcome in my type of roles is that I convene a lot of people and a lot of entities. And so it's really getting them to get past their own territorialism and self-interest. In this type of business, what's good for community will be good for you. And so you have to get past self-interest of organizations and think more systemically about what you have to accomplish. It doesn't mean that you're not going to focus on those daily activities of getting the job done and giving people access to resources, whether it's housing, whether it's workforce development or entrepreneurship, because I'm a big believer in economic justice. I think that it is like the foundation to a lot of the other forms of justice that we deal with. But I think the hardest thing for me has been that each time I walk into a door, I realize I have to convene new people, deal with new perceptions of leadership. And that actually, at times, can be a daunting task. The other thing I will say is being a Black man, particularly in the social sector and public sector, there's not as many of us in the seats as you would think. And so oftentimes, no matter how much you've accomplished, you end up having to pre-prove yourself each time.
Yeah, I imagine. Even in my own experience, I can say that it's true, right? Because your credentials get you through the door, but there's something about establishing credibility. And in your seat, you've got to bring people together. You've got to unite them and get buy-in under the vision for the greater good, to your point, rather than the territorial space they may be sitting in. And so with that, it takes the gift of influence as well as charisma to be able to get that to come together. At what point in your career did you feel successful? And what specifically made you feel that way?
You know, you in time you get accolades. People pat you on the back occasionally. Um, but I think that I really reached success, some form of success, when I was sitting in a coffee shop and I had started an initiative back in the early 2000s to change the way that we describe communities who were struggling financially and communities of color. And that was to call them, instead of at risk, that you would refer to them as at opportunity. And we actually got that patented and, copyrighted. And so I was proud to actually be someone who came up with that notion, and that it was adopted even before the Obama administration. And so when I really knew that it worked is that when someone was talking to me in a coffee shop and they referred to certain communities as at risk and immediately looked at me and apologized because they knew not only what I stood for, but now this notion of just calling communities at risk was now passé. We were going to think about them as opportunities, not just for themselves, but for us. And I think that that's probably, though it's symbolic, it's much different from, getting hundreds of people into jobs. It was different from the loans to small minority businesses. It was different from any of those because those are all tangible forms of success. But this one was more about a mental model to me that I actually really was proud of, because when you change systems, you first have to change mentality. Resources, collaboration, other things follow once mentalities change.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go with it, right? It's the mindset. The Bible tells us, as a man thinketh, so is he, right? And so that definition and really reframing it to really speak to the potential rather than the difficulty, it allows us to walk in a different mindset, to your point, and be able to approach it from a space of solution rather than a rehearsal of problem. And so I love how that moment was so impactful to you, because to your point, it wasn't the tangible accomplishment. It was the reality that I am making a difference in how people are thinking, and they recognize what I represent, right? For him to apologize, he recognized what you represent. Now, when you look at your greatest career accomplishment, does it align with that moment, or is it a different time?
Well, they align with that moment in some ways, because I use that sort of framework of that opportunity to help lead and create what I would call an entire movement.
Okay.
And so, for example, when I was at the Urban League of Central Carolinas, that same language was used to create national certifications. In the early 2000s, for example, um, we created one of the first nationally certified broadband schools here in Charlotte.
Mm.
Um, we created a HVAC program that also became nationally recognized with the Environmental Protection Association, agency rather. And we also began to develop things like the bank of the Urban League of Central Carolinas that allowed businesses to get loans. And we partnered with, at the time, a bank called Carolina Premier, and created a unique branch that allowed us to get thousands of people who were unbanked, banked for the first time,
Wow.
or rebanked because they were sort of cast out of the system for their past. 30% of those that we served at the time, and actually throughout my career, were people who were formerly incarcerated and they were returning residents. And so this whole movement, a notion of opportunity, actually then leaked into some of the tangible ways that we implemented it. But it had to be first cast in that vision that everything was about the opportunity of people, that they were opportunities for us. Again, it goes back to one of my favorite sayings: what's good for community will be good for us. And that sometimes means that we won't always be able to be out front. Sometimes we'll be leading from the back or from the side. Or sometimes that means that we ourselves are not best fit to do it, that we need to support someone else and do what we do best.
So when you think about what stimulated this consciousness with you? Is it your upbringing? Was there someone in your family? Like, what stimulated? Was it your own experiences? What gave you this heart for the way you serve?
I think it's a combination of things. First of all, I had a mother who was an advocate in her own right. She advocated actually for housing, even sometimes would go undercover to realty companies to see if they would try to redline her thought in terms of where she lived. And she did that. She also did a lot of work in community centers. So there was one that influence. Two, I got to watch as a young man in Long Island, Long Beach. I was in a segregated community that was segregated old school by race. And so I had middle-class African Americans who were maybe struggling financially, blue collar, green collar, white collar workers, all at my fingertips, in my eyesight. I got to see these different individuals interact with each other. I got to see them go to work. I got to see them participate in community. And so when I looked at it, and it's oftentimes when people say you're living in poorer conditions or isolated or segregated areas, you're often cast as by what you don't have.
Right.
What I saw was a richness in these communities. And by the way, in my town of Long Beach, 70% of them were first generation migrants, or their children were born of migrants from the South. So in a way too, there was a lot of history that was instilled in me. My mother taught me about my roots in Alabama. My family fought against the Klan. My family found a way to get out of sharecropping and now had 300 plus acres of land that they farmed. So it sort of gave me a sense of possibilities through circumstance. And so coming here to Charlotte, when I would hear terms like at risk, when I would hear even some of my own people talk about populations in negative ways, I knew that that was something that I had to change because I couldn't live in that type of reality with them.
Gotcha. That's beautiful. What was instilled in you and what you embraced set you on a course to be a game changer. And I think we all can appreciate how you serve and appreciate your willingness to see the power of your experience and how to make it more powerful. And so I knew there had to be a really good story there because your resolve is deep. And I'm just elated to hear about how you saw the richness in your community. And it wasn't necessarily about the dollar. It was about the experience. It was about the culture. It was about the investment, the community, and you allowed that to inspire your life and how you show up. And that is beautiful.
Let me just tell you something too, and I appreciate that, sister, is when you have those type of experiences in your life, what I tell people too, that in some way, shape, or form, you still do not let go. You still hold on to those communities and what they did for you. I'll give you an example. This past weekend, I had the pleasure of leading a petition to get a street rededicated to a schoolmate of mine who happened to be one of the most prolific hip hop artists of our time, MF Doom. And they call him the rapper's favorite rapper. And but he actually helped bridge a lot of interracial, intergenerational conversation around what hip hop culture should be. Obviously, I felt very close to it because I grew up in it. But to go back to my own community and to be able to stand and do a countdown of an unveiling like that, right? Sort of brings you back full circle. So what I will tell people is that when you have those good moments in your life, even if they're distance away, and it's not like I didn't have my struggles there too, right? Hold on to them in some form or fashion. Make sure you still stay connected. Don't just move on without any touch to where you come from. Because I'm going to tell you, it will rejuvenate you each time. And just recently, writing an op-ed on eviction prevention, I was just greatly influenced by the people I had just saw. And so I got on the plane and instantly started writing it.
Wow. Wow. That inspiration is powerful. And I love how you open yourself to embrace it and how you ride the wave of it, right? You felt that impulse to put your pen to paper and immediately lifted your voice to use your platform, your power that you have to raise attention to the area that needed to be addressed and needed a voice. That to me is a great sign of leadership, right? It's you transcending a title and saying, how can I make impact? And I believe you can do that from any seat, But when you have arrived at a certain level of experience and exposure, and you can be in tuned enough to know I can make a difference and I can be impactful, not just where I am, but where I used to be, that I can look back and know that there's things that I can do to give homage and give credit and recognition to others is very selfless. And it is also at the same time very significant. One of the things I love to say is that we reach a certain point where we achieve success, right? We can call out the tangibles, we can call out the facts. But when you can take that and translate it and let it transcend into being significant, that's where you start making a difference. And that's what I hear you saying has occurred for you this last weekend and even on your way home. Now, when you think about this, the best career advice that you ever received, tell me what that was and who gave it to you.
Wow. I think, it sounds cliche, but people who follow passions end up doing better in the long run. And I'm not just talking about financially, I'm really talking about for your peace of mind to move forward. And I can remember my mother saying that. I can remember a very close friend of mine saying that, do what you would do for free. So I believe in that. It sounds cliche, but it's cliche because it's true in many ways. I've seen plenty of people make plenty of money and they're unhappy in what they're doing. And they're constantly searching. I think too, one of the things that I think was very important for me is my mother said something to me I think was very important. And she said, act as if you belong there. Because she knew that this world wouldn't always be welcoming as you tried to crash through certain doors. And to me, what that also said was don't be confined. So a lot of what I do now is that here I am in this local area, right, doing affordable housing, but I get to go to New York and do cultural change work, in my old community. And then I get to also get on a national platform today and actually talk about this eviction moratorium, or even just recently about the false accusation of Black men and how policies are allowing that to happen at a rate more than we would want to know. That actually allowed me to have national platforms and conversation that doesn't confine me just to the space. And this is what I'm talking about. The justice is very intertwined with many of these things. And oftentimes we just feel like we have to be in some particular lane. While I think we don't need to be sort of masters of everything, I do believe, though, we need to understand the interconnectivity of many of the things that go on. And I'll just in this part with this, I was asked, what is one of the most important things that we could do in eviction prevention reform? And someone would probably say, normally change systems, as I've advocated for other things. But one of the things I told them that I didn't necessarily put in the op-ed was also support the John Lewis Voters' Right Act. And they said, what? And I said, of course. I said, because part of what we're experiencing is the hiccups of this experiment called democracy. And if we have more people participating, some of these systems also begin to change because our voice is there and in place to ensure that it does. So I see the interconnectivity of all of these things.
That's beautiful. And I think lending the support to what doesn't seem directly yours allows other people to make that connection as well. And it also breeds the community, right, that is necessary for us all to come up in address everything that needs our attention, even though your 1, 2, or 3 things may be categorized in this particular space. I have a hear and understand the importance of what's happening over there, and I want to champion that too. I love that. So how important are mentors or sponsors to professional success, in your opinion? And did you forge any relationships like that?
Yeah, I had plenty. One of my mentors, one you all probably familiar, Carol Hardison, when she first came to Charlotte. She, when she hired me on to direct about 90% of our operation, I really looked at some of the ways that she moved in terms of advocacy. And also found my own voice. And we ended up really exchanging a lot of ideas. She taught me a lot about the philanthropic world here and its setting. I taught her, or maybe spoke to her more about the notion of paternalism as somebody who was also a professor of African American studies, and the importance of diversity. We understood together what diversity and equity meant and how important it was to the work that we were doing at the time. So with her, I think it was those exchanges. I remember as a young man too, there's another gentleman by Hubert Biffmore that ran the MLK Center where I was, that I ended up directing later on in life. And how there were some things that I learned there, how to be resilient, for one, because that community was constantly under pressure. To how to use your intellect at times along with your heart to make things happen. So he was one that I think taught me how to play what I call social and public chess.
Tell me a little bit more about that, social and public chess.
Well, a lot of times, the beauty of sometimes being marginalized, they don't always see you coming. And so what you do is you begin to learn a lot more about people by listening, because one of the things about leadership, we've talked about a lot about shared vision and other things, but also it's just being able to listen, and you start hearing different sides of issues, and you begin to start to formulate your ways to navigate through those, not necessarily to get past them, but to actually confront them in ways that allows you to talk different languages, to be fluid enough to do that. And so I've always felt like it was no problem for me to step into a red or a blue room, a purple room, a white, black, Latinx, or Asian, or any other room, and felt comfortable. I could speak in front of all women, all men, mixed group. It didn't matter to me, because at that point I began to at least empathize with where they were coming from, even if I didn't agree with them, even if what they had I felt was sort of the anti-Patrick, right? So I think that's important to understand. When I told some people that I had to even empathize with racists, they said, "What kind of comment is that?" I said, empathy is about understanding how people get there. Doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean support. But it does mean that there's an understanding, so that even as I dialogue with them, I knew where we could embrace and have conversation. I also knew that if I was beating my head up against a wall and that's it, it's the end. But it didn't cause me to actually sacrifice any of my dignity, any of my respect. It's just a matter of me understanding how people get where they are, because I do believe heavily in social construction as much as I believe in spirituality. I believe they both happen at the same time.
That's beautiful. I love that. I love it. I love it. I'm going to be playing this back. I want you to know, because you are dropping so many great nuggets that I am going to feast on. But I'm keep going. But I love that concept. I love the comment when you said they can see us coming. And because of that, we have to make sure we equip ourselves to be able to approach those situations with confidence, grace, empathy, and understanding. And I think the examples that you have given about how to navigate each of those different types of environments is something that a lot of people struggle with. They do. They struggle with environments where it's different than what their experience has been. Because just because I'm Black doesn't mean I want to be around a whole bunch of Black people, because my experience could have been that I grew up in a predominantly white area. And so I have notions about being around all Blacks and vice versa, right? So being able to walk with grace and confidence in each of those situations is something that is going to allow you to be effective wherever you go. And when you're working in the service industry, like when you're serving in community, you have to be able to do that because the community is represented by so many types of people that you need to rally and get support from. So I appreciate the chess. I love that. So go ahead.
I just want to think about it too, because I do remember two gentlemen, Dr. Melvin Penn, brother named Douglas Spears, two fraternity brothers of mine who were older. And at the time, as part of my mentoring, I remember them both saying something I found very profound, yet very simplistic. And that was, homework is for home. And so what they were basically saying is that before you go into the trenches, right? Do your homework, but don't try to do it there. It's too late.
It's too late.
And I found that actually also is something that I've carried with me for a long time.
Yeah, you show up prepared. I love that. So when you think about your role as a Black man in the C-suite carrying the title of CEO, what's the biggest challenge? What's your biggest challenge?
Well, I think right now the biggest challenge is really trying to inspire a shared vision that actually is very inclusive. And that takes work and it takes time. And people want you to accomplish everything like tomorrow, right? They want to see results like yesterday. And in this type of field, that actually comes only after you fully engage community at different levels, particularly those most impacted by what you do. And so right now, one of the biggest things that I have to do is get a shared vision around a regional housing framework. And what that is a framework that those who are actually most impacted by affordable housing and need it, to those policymakers, to those who provide services, and to those developers, all of us have to get on a page, right, in writing, where we create a Bible for ourselves to follow. And that means it's going to take time to go deep into communities and get information. And I'm not just talking about surveys. I'm talking about conversations where I'm not just asking what you need today, but I need to understand, what are your dreams for tomorrow, right? So that we start to build something that just doesn't meet an immediate need to an earlier point that we discussed, but it actually meets a future need and desire going forward. And I think that I find probably one of the hardest tasks at the beginning, because when you come into something new, as I am in this role, and people see your past success, they want that replicated, but they want it replicated today. They don't realize what it took to get there.
Yeah, we do live in a microwave society, right? Where we want everything quick. But I think one of the things that we can trust, especially in proven leaders, and the reason why they are pulling you in is because they have the confidence that you can do it. Like your track record is there with proven results that says you can do it. And the rest of it is the chess game, right? The rest of it is the management of it all. Let's talk about 2020, right? It was an unprecedented time frame for us all. What impressed you about industry, about your team, about people, about yourself? I want to talk about what you were impressed with.
In 2020, I was senior policy advisor for wealth building in Richmond. And, So we had workforce components. We had some social venture components, and obviously a lot of poverty alleviation strategies, really around stability. Because at that point, so many people were suffering that you really were trying to keep them stable at this point. And what I liked most is that I had so many of my colleagues willing to try different things and step up because they had embraced the notion that the pandemic could also provide the opportunity of a reset. We could change different systems. As a matter of fact, while I was there, within 6 months, led the design of a regional eviction prevention model, their first of its kind in that area. They never had one. The city didn't have an eviction program. They had a diversion program, but not a prevention program. We were able to start that in the pandemic. And so when I look at that, what it told me is that individuals understood that while this moment was difficult and one that was mentally and spiritually draining at times, it also was an opportunity to just reset. When we look at the equity movements and other things that occurred during that time, George Floyd, et cetera, everyone who was conscious enough to realize it looked at this as an opportunity also to make some change. And I think that we seized that wave, many of us, and stepped up in different ways. It was good to be who we were, because now our talent was more recognized because you need to talk to us.
Absolutely. So when you are assessing it, a choosing of your battles, right? Because they're all flaring. What are the key things that says, this is where I need to focus, or this is where I need to be hands-on and it needs to have my attention? So what are the key things you assess when you're choosing your battles amongst everything that's going on and presenting itself as an opportunity for you to get involved?
One is, do I have any power to make a difference, and how long will that take? So I make an assessment. And then, is it connected to other issues that I may discover low-hanging fruit on the way? So that's one. I'm definitely going to look at that, because I feel that whatever we can change and it's in our power, we can do it. You know, when I talked about that eviction prevention model, I also was able to write the policy on it. So, you know, once you gave me the pen and gave me that type of power, I could expand it, you know. And I'll just give you a quick example. I looked at unemployment rates with African Americans and how long it would take them to get jobs, because at the time when they lost employment pre-pandemic, it took up to 26 weeks for them to find new employment. That was more than any other group, save Native Americans, but they were a much smaller population. So when I looked at that, I said, I can base some of the policy on African Americans as an example, because it will open the door for anyone. Right? If I can get them. The other is, I looked at things like, well, who's excluded, but we need to include. So part of the CARES Act didn't allow people who didn't have a loss of income or some increased expenses or some health crisis, right, to actually get eviction prevention assistance, for example. But when I looked at communities that were suffering, like those who had issues of domestic violence or other forced moves, I said, well, we had to look at them actually through the lens of a health crisis, right? And had to look at that as a health crisis. So I petitioned our local regional HUD to approve it, because I was able to make a connection to actual health. It ended up opening the door for others. So whatever you have in your power, you start to look and you make an assessment of where you can make some changes. The other thing is then making an assessment too of who else do you need on board? Who else's power do you need to move some things? And so when I did some of those models, I looked at foundations. I looked at other public and social sector and the private sector, And instead of informing them what I was going to do, I actually came and asked them to help build it.
Mm,
And they were more than willing. And when people help build things,
mhm,
they actually become dedicated to it.
mhm,
Because now they're on the line with you. They
mm,
want to see it through just like you
mhm,
do.
mhm. That's beautiful. Those two characteristics help with the evaluation. What do you think is, or what have you noticed as a mistake that some people make when they're making that assessment that trips them up? Has anything stuck out to you?
Yeah, I think that making assumptions about those who will be most impacted by what you're doing,
Mhm,
particularly in my case, policy.
mhm,
So really going into communities and having deep conversations, and I'm not just always talking about some group that you
mhm,
put together. I'm talking about intimate ones with
mhm,
individuals. Um, there's so much more that you learn sometimes by actually having a little of both,
mhm,
so that you start to learn really not only just what they're up against, but what they want, what they need, and then beyond that too, what else can you add of value that can actually enhance their lives? So I'll give you an example. I remember talking to some folks who lived in public housing, and we're on a call together, Zoom, and we're having conversations about what they need. And I started to notice that whenever I asked them, I said, individually, what are your hopes and dreams? What do you want to accomplish for yourself over the next 5 years, etc.?
mhm,
They would often talk in terms of just community stuff. Well, I want my community to have this or have that. And I said, no, I'm talking about you
mhm,
as a
mhm,
person.
mhm, mhm,
And what I found is you almost had to redirect people because they were so focused at times on getting just past the hurdle in front of them.
mhm,
And no one provided them the opportunity to really think about their own dreams.
mhm,
Um, and when they actually voiced their own dreams, collectively, it gave me a much better sense about the things they wanted. And as I told people, and I tell them all the time, in communities that deal with poverty or anything else, what I found most interesting is that they are very invested in the American dream of ownership,
mhm,
ownership of homes, ownerships of their businesses, ownership of the community. I said, they're not looking for how you just make it safe. They also want a school that will educate the children in the way they feel it should be educated. They
mhm,
want to actually own their communities. They want greenery around the communities instead of us putting them in these sort of concrete deserts.
mhm,
They want these type of things. And so that changes how we approach
mhm,
anything that we do. Because
mhm,
at the end of the day, I'm not looking now just to provide you some affordable place to live.
mhm.
I'm trying to find you a affordable place eventually that you can
Oh,
own,
right.
that you can prosper,
Mhm,
and do all of those things.
mhm. Absolutely. So when you recently made a shift, right, professionally, and so I'd like to just understand what factors did you consider when you decided to make the professional shift that you recently made? What was key for you?
All right, so I'll be just really transparent on this. I had 3 offers at this time. It was sort of like, when it's a desert. When it rains, it pours, right? And I would say that the 2 others would probably been very career trajectory changing jobs.
Mhm,
The one I took was after consultation with my family and children.
mhm,
And so family won in this case
mhm,
over career in some
mhm,
ways.
mhm,
And so what drove me here too is that obviously looking at the issue of affordable housing, that you had a city that was willing to create an entity,
mhm,
funded with some tax dollars to start, because they also realized this issue was now at their door and
mhm,
they wanted to be more proactive about it.
mhm,
And to me, it also allows me then to create something from the ground up where we can create not just something that we do locally, but a national model for other municipalities to follow.
mhm.
And so that also the challenge of that. drew me along with family.
That's awesome. You know, a lot of times you hear scenarios where family and work-life balance isn't a huge factor. When you look at the leaders, the demands that come from leading entities can be pressure packed. And so it's very rewarding to hear you say that that was a leading factor in the choice that you made, and that you valued it enough to make a choice in agreement with what was best for your family, instead of putting more pressure on the family in a way that you were already hearing that they wanted, you know, some attention or some valued exposure in what was happening with you. So I honor you for that, because a lot of times it's dismissed and undervalued. And so to hear you esteem it is very impressive. So here's my question. When you look back to every day since high school graduation, what has been the best investment that you've made in yourself?
Education,
Mhm,
no doubt about it. And education is varied. I went an undergraduate, got a degree in marketing,
mhm,
master's in Afro-American studies with a focus in media and policy,
mhm,
and then a Ph.D. in history with a focus in civil rights and community and migration.
mhm,
Um, it allowed me to look at the world very differently. It allowed me to see connections where people normally won't see a connection.
mhm,
Um, and that's because they don't understand how people get there. Part of a whole equity conversation, what I think is most misunderstood about it, is that it's not just giving someone an opportunity because of where they are in life at the moment.
mhm,
It is understanding the journey of how did we get here.
mhm,
So when it comes to diversity, I can see you.
mhm,
You're here,
mhm,
right? We're having this conversation on your podcast,
mhm,
but I'm actually more interested in how you got here
mhm,
because that tells me something different, than just the fact that you're here.
mhm, mhm,
Um, it gives me a blueprint. Um, and I think about that with communities too.
mhm,
Um, so education, without a doubt, and I don't just talk about education formally, but even education informally through networks, through my community, through others. Um, I think that the formal education just gave me a different way to frame it.
mhm,
So there were some lessons I had learned, and then in the formal setting, I said, "Oh, this is what that's called,"
mhm,
right?
mhm.
And so I was able to actually now start to lend concepts to what my experience was.
Yeah. What's the biggest misconception about CEOs?
Well, I say in the corporate environment, others biggest is that all they care is about the bottom line and shareholders, right? In mine, um, it's that they only care about their mission,
Mm,
period, and that's all that matters.
mm,
But that's actually not the case.
mhm,
I deeply believe that again, what's good for community will be good for us.
mhm,
And so looking at the larger picture, at times, even my own mission may have to take a back seat to something that's more pressing at the moment.
mhm,
And I think that one of the biggest misconceptions that CEOs have, even about their role, is that they can't be as fluid, that they
mhm,
have to be rigid.
mhm,
Um, and so that I think at times is where we bump into problems because life is very situational.
mhm,
It's complex.
mhm,
Um, we have to have policies, regulations, rules that also account for some of that flexibility,
mhm,
right? It's almost like it's illegal to run a red light, but if a Mack truck is coming at you full speed, 90 miles an hour,
mhm.
you better go through that light. Right? And so we have to understand that those the situations come and that we'll have to have the flexibility of it too. And I would say the other last thing I'll say about that is binary thinking.
Mm,
um, going back to the world being complex, we think it has to be either this or that, and we don't account for the gray or the ambiguity. And that is something that leaders, no matter what their title is, have to work through, is moments of ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are going to push anything to where no one has been before, you are going to be in an ambiguous situation.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to be able to work through that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, let me tell you this. Around here, I challenge people to build a life that they love without apology. And I always close out every podcast with what I call the LLH questions. And it really is focused on life, love, and the pursuit of happiness. So let me ask you these. What's your life wisdom? What would you tell your younger self about life if you could?
Don't rush to make decisions. I think that knowing myself as an individual, a natural risk taker, then at times that will make you impulsive.
Mm-hmm.
So the earlier me didn't understand that about myself. And so I would make these impulse decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes not understanding that some decisions were made out of trauma that I experienced and had yet to acknowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There are some that I didn't acknowledge until my 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if I had an opportunity, I would do like one of my favorite artists of the 80s, Junior, would say, Mama used to say, take your time, young man. I would go back and say, please, let's rethink some of these moments for you to take just a little bit extra time before you make the decision.
Gotcha. What's your love wisdom? What would you tell your younger self about love if you could?
That you can truly love and still harm, so that you have to be conscious about not just how you love people, but how they want to be loved. And that took me a long time to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Because just because I may have a certain nature doesn't mean that that person does.
Mm-hmm.
And so that took some time to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you get past a certain age, and no one really checks you on it,
Mm-hmm.
you just perpetuate it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, to ensure that you are loving people the way they want to be loved, if you can't do that, then you have to love them from afar.
That's beautiful. And then finally, what's your happiness wisdom? What would you tell your younger self about happiness if you could?
Oh, wow. Happiness is about embracing the notion of having different experiences.
Mm.
I limited sometimes the experiences I could have due to the work.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm discovering that I want more of that balance of experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get me wrong, as a young person, growing up in New York, came to historically Black college, I had some great experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm talking about intentional experiences where you're very intentional about where you go. Sometimes you don't always control how you experience it,
Mm-hmm.
but you know that it's something that will give you a new perspective on life.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely, I would say try to have as many different experiences, healthy ones, as you can. And some will require risk too.
Mm-hmm.
Step out of your comfort zone. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
Stepping out of my comfort zone has not been the issue for me growing up. It was, making sure that I really tallied up, the risk factors versus the reward of it all.
That's beautiful. Well, Dr. Graham, I am so pleased. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for how you serve. I want to thank you for how you show up. I want to thank you for your example of prioritizing family. I think that's critically important, and I'm sure your family is feeling valued. I want to thank you for all of the work that you're doing to make an impact, leave a legacy, drive change on all the fronts that you've touched on throughout your life. And I think the beautiful thing is, I can tell you're not anywhere turning down. You are continuing to keep that nozzle going. And even though it may not be coming out at the rate it used to, your intensity is there. And you are learning to use the influence in a more impactful way. And I think it's beautiful. And so I just want to thank you. And I want to close out by just simply saying success looks so good on you. And I appreciate everything that you're doing for our community.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing, appreciate the forum, and I hope that it leads to further dialogue for some people out there who are either leading, considering leading, or scared of leading.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I know that you'll agree with me that Dr. Patrick Graham is a trailblazer. We as a community of people everywhere, owe honor and respect to people who are on the front lines making a difference for us every single day. And Dr. Patrick Graham does exactly that. I am so grateful that he took the time to share with us from the wealth of his experience and to give us the nuggets that has helped to make a difference in his both professional and personal development. You know, Dr. Graham, there was one key nugget that you shared that impacted me. You said, use your intellect and use your heart. That means take our smarts as well as our empathy and our compassion and make a difference. So thank you. Thank you for that one nugget and the many others that you shared in this podcast episode. And I pray nothing but continued blessings upon you and all the work that you're doing. Now, if you haven't taken time to rate and review this podcast, I think this is one that deserves your 5 stars. So take time today, rate and review, and let me hear from you in our community with your nugget on how this was impactful for you. And be sure to share the podcast with a friend who could use these tips from the top.
Well, that's it, beautiful. Thank you for tuning in. Don't ever forget that you truly deserve life, love, and all the happiness your heart can hold. Be relentless in building a life you love without apology. I'm Denise Taylor, and you can always find me in our free Facebook community. Life, love, in the pursuit of happiness, easy to find. Now, if you want more information about my success superpowers, as I'm sure you do, download my free Success Superpowers ebook at denisetaylor.live/podcast. And one last thing, always embrace your power and go.